B. Our first item of business, is the approval of the 226 school building committee meeting minutes. Bob, do you have a?
So moved.
Second.
I can probably try and eyeball it. All right, Bob's just going to get me the attendance sheet. Andrea, can you just take a tally if I just call through people for the roll call? Okay. Okay, somebody. All right. Mrs. Monaco.
Aye.
Mr. Rosenblatt.
Aye.
Mr. Villano.
Yes.
Mr. Denizio.
Abstain.
Mr. Brooks.
Aye.
I assume that second John is Mr. Lyons.
Aye.
Mrs. Bond.
Aye.
Can you scroll, Bob? Ms. Kasha.
Yes.
All right. Mrs. Priest.
Aye.
Dr. Conti.
Yes.
And I abstain.
I have 902.
All right, 902. Thank you. Do we have any public comment on the online? I don't have any one in the room. No. Okay. Design update.
Oh, here we go. Okay. All right, thanks. Hello, everyone. We just wanted to fill you all in on where we are with the site design as well as the building design. We have, since we last met, had a follow-up meeting with the Traffic and Safety Working Group, and we have a few options that we reviewed with them. Want to go next? So at our first meeting with them last month, we reviewed options A through D, and then when we last met with them a couple of weeks ago, we added a couple of options E and F. We were looking at ways to potentially move any of the drop-off area from north of the traffic circle to maintain safe crossing without having children cross from Westwood over to the school over a driveway. Option F was considered, and when we last met with the traffic group, we talked about providing a better layout for buses and cars and vans so that the cars and vans would not have to cross each other. The issue with option F is while it improves on where the bus drop-off is, it really pushes the access to the school from bus drop-off to over 150 feet. So when we met with the group, we talked about ways to consolidate or make sure that we minimize crossings, but still see how we could maintain that separation of buses and cars and vans. So what we came out of that was a couple of sketches, very rough sketches that we did in a couple of days, had a follow-up meeting, and so we developed option G, H, J, and K. We always skip the I because it looks like a 1. And it really, option G was really favorably received because what it does is it takes the cars and the vans and separates them out completely, provides the buses a whole separate drop-off area as well. Options H and J really did not improve things in terms of the parking and the crossing of the cars and vans. And option K seem to take up a lot of space for a traffic circle. So we took option G and developed that further. We have not yet met again with the traffic group, but we did send them some of the developed options. So if we go to the next slide, we have actually two potential options for sub-options G. G1 separates the buses still. They are accessing the site just north of the traffic circle. They have their own dedicated drop-off loop accessing the building on the west entrance. The cars and vans would enter the site at 4 o'clock from the traffic circle, and then they would peel off. The cars would have over 1,000 linear feet of queuing, and would drop off at close to the entrance. That would be where the starting point is. And the vans that are identified in pink would be dropping off on the other side of a tree. What we thought would be nice is kind of a tree alley, which is a walkway that leads from the fields area back to the school. But what this does is provides total separation between the cars and the vans during drop-off and pickup time. The only crossover with this scheme is when if the vans are a little delayed and the cars are leaving the site, there might be a crossover as the cars are leaving. We were asked then by the school department to look at a scheme that would incorporate the buses and the vans because that would potentially take most of the traffic outside of we wouldn't be developing the loop north of the traffic circle. So what this does is that it brings all of the traffic into the site at the 4 o'clock position of the traffic circle, and the cars would peel off and have their own dedicated drop-off and pickup queuing lane, whereas the buses and the vans would share a driveway. We would have a dedicated bus drop-off that's protected with a median strip, and it would allow the vans to continue and be able to drop off and pick up, much as the first option A that we shared many weeks ago. While the positive aspect of G2 is that the buses are now, and there are no vans, they're removed from a loop north of the traffic circle, it does bring a lot of traffic in to the site on the same driveway. This option also does not allow for a full 7 buses to queue at any given point, but we are going to continue to study these two options with the traffic group. What we are really getting excited about is that either one of these options provides a really nice front yard to the school. So by creating this larger loop, it creates this nice green space, and we have an opportunity to develop that into a very naturalistic landscape, a very welcoming front yard to the school. We also might be able to use it for a stormwater feature and potentially even be able to bring in some outdoor learning opportunities here. So I'm going to pause here before we get into the playground and the fields, but would love to entertain any questions or comments.
So this, I was looking at it earlier today, and it looks like these options reduce the number of parking spaces available at the site.
So the main parking area still accommodates 120 spaces, and then there would be 15 to the north side of the school.
Okay. And then just from experience at Fox Hill during COVID, when there was a lot of cars up there in buses and vans, the biggest bottlenecking issue there is where everybody crosses over. It still is that way right now. Having cars cross over in front of buses or vice versa, it's just very congested. So if we could avoid that as much as possible, I think that would help keep that traffic out of the neighborhoods, which was one of the biggest pieces we've heard from the neighbors.
To the chair, would you clarify where the crossing over I'm not following where the crossing over occurs?
So in these pictures, they'll be crossing over in there, but when we go up to Fox Hill now, there's crossover, when people are leaving, they're trying to cross over to get out of the school. And there's just that added layer. If you get 3 or 4 cars backed up trying to turn left onto Fox Hill Road, then the buses get backed up. It just gets a little muddied in that area when it's at peak time at our current location. But in this one, the G2 option and the G1 option both have the cars crossing over where the vans or potentially the vans and the buses are coming in from.
You know, that really, sorry, this is Dawn, I'm doing all day tonight. So, we were looking at that. The 7 or 8 vans coming in, you know, the only possibility of a crossover is when those 7 or 8 vans come on into their dedicated loop while the parents are actually exiting. And working with our traffic consultants, we're suggesting to put a stop sign. Andrea, I know you're driving, a kind of a stop sign at the bottom of the promenade, so parents actually have to stop before they proceed. But those are 2 dedicated lanes, so they wouldn't be sharing a lane. Option G2 does pose a lot of congestion, as Vivian said, and that could be problematic, especially because we can't seem to get all 7 buses lining up. So if all the buses show up at time, you know, the tail end of the bus is going to be sticking out into the drive. So we agree that that would be problematic with G2, but with G1, it's 7 vans that's the only potential conflict.
I was just gonna say, we were chatting kind of before the meeting about, and I got David and I think Tara on.
But I've never been at Fox Hill pickup where all 7 buses have been there at once ever. I guess maybe somebody witnessed it, but usually they're one at a time, especially pickup, it's one at a time. I don't know, Dave or Tara, if you want to comment.
Yeah, I would say at this point, at the absolute most in the afternoon, we'll have maybe 3 at a time.
And in the morning, is it?
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, the buses pick up, I
would
haven't,
say in the morning they come a bit closer together, but in the afternoon, I would say at the most there's 3 out there, occasionally 4.
Yeah. That's the only negative that we saw with option G2 is if you do have, I think it's 3 buses that can be, is it 4?
I think we actually show 5.
5.
Yeah. So there's 5.
So-
Yeah, and there are 8 vans.
There will be also fewer students, so I don't even know if it's still be 7 buses.
Well, there 450 kids, right? We want to plan for the future, I guess. So in our mind, we've been saying that it's pretty much the same enrollment, but it could be less. You're right. And what's not currently occurring there now are the DSC students that would also require vans that we're accounting for here. So yeah, there's totally pros and cons with both of those. I think option G2 really addresses the concern about needing a crossing guard at the bus drop-off loop so that students have a safe path of travel without a crossing guard, making sure that the buses don't leave this circle while they're crossing.
Mrs. Reed.
I think the point that the chair made with the less kids, I understand that piece. I think
different issue with regards to how late the buses come to pick up kids. My kids are there 15, 20 minutes on average after school, which is a whole different situation. But I think ideally we would like the buses to be there when school dismisses so that the kids aren't having behavioral issues in the school. But that's a little off topic there. But if also, did we check with like safety in regards to like future planning? If we had to quote evacuate the school or something, if we needed all the buses there, would we have the space to facilitate those things, I guess is my concern.
Yeah, there's there's no change when you look at the two options. There's literally no change from the van drop off and the main parking lot, right? The difference is we added the bus loop to the north. And, we understand the concerns there 100%. But trying to anticipate the future, if, the enrollment goes up or whatever, it's a consideration to design in a loop up there. And just not use it, but use it in case you need to, right? That's another way to do it, because once you build this, it's going to be hard to try to modify it afterwards.
All right, we believe that G1 really gives you the flexibility
That you wanted to be in it. Oh.
to either place vans up at the North Loop or buses and vice versa. Regarding muster points and egress points out of the school, both of these options provide really good amounts of space where kids can congregate when there's an event or a fire drill.
Yeah, I would think an emergency buses could easily go in the parent drop-off line, so. Outrider, still.
Oh, just one quick question. The driveway in, it sort of shows 3 lanes of traffic, 2 coming in and 1 out. Is that actually 3 lanes? Or is it, so if it's 3 lanes, if their bus is backed up, they can actually sit in the middle lane before they make the turn.
Yes.
Should that happen. General impression is this sort of takes a bigger bite out of the open space on the southwest side than the other plans. And so obviously there's a trade-off being made. I do kind of like that there's fewer trees you have to get cut down without the bus loop. But overall, it does seem to have some positive aspects. And I guess that's it. Complicated setup. Thank you.
Good, yeah, okay. Yeah, so you kind of hit the nail on the head. Why don't we go to the next slide with this additional loop on the front. The previous options for fields that we presented to the Parks and Rec Commission were a variation, right? There were options to have a couple of U10 soft soccer fields and a softball field, 2 softball, 1 soccer, 1 multi-purpose lacrosse, which is the option 4. And when we met with the Parks and Rec Commission, they actually really like the idea of the multi-purpose field, and it really works well with the school department as well. Having that next to the playground provides really good flexible green space for the kids to use during recess, during field day. Kids have great supervision, whether they're on the playground or in the fields, because of the proximity. The option G site layout with the circulation does impact how much green space we have remaining. And the next slide will show you that what remains is the multi-purpose field, which is full-size lacrosse with the 3 U10 option. What does not fit anymore is the softball field, and our understanding, based on some conversations that Mr. Kuna has had with the athletic director, is that if there are, I think in order for it to be useful for girls softball, they would need 2 softball fields, and we could not really fit 2 softball fields, and the open space for the school department. What we heard from the Parks and Rec Commission is that the priority is for more the multi-purpose field. So we believe this option G does accomplish that, and it meets the needs of the school department. So coupled with this revised layout for traffic, we believe that option G with this field layout really can work well for the school and provides a great sense of presence really for the school. When you think about as you drive in, you're seeing a nice field or landscape in front of the school and not a parking lot. So we'd love to proceed with this, but we'd like to hear what one has any other thoughts.
Mr. Gannon?
Again, thanks. I just wanted to comment as well that I do agree with what Vivian just said. It's not that the schools don't want to have a baseball field. I think that the school department, as far as Fox Hill, did express concern that they did want to have one. But at the same exact time, we don't do Little League baseball within the school department. That's handled through the rec. So from an athletics point of view, strictly from the school side, an athletics director, the softball fields mentioned that two would be preferable and one would not because they would have to separate teams. My understanding from the rec commission meeting as well too, again, they would like a baseball field but have more wants for a multi-use field and a full-size lacrosse field / multi-purpose or multiple U10 soccer fields as well. So I think there's still some conversation to have, but no one in the town is giving up on baseball. We just think that there's a better fit right here with this field for the needs currently expressed.
Okay, I'm a little disappointed because I know that as far as playground space, that baseball field gets a lot of use. Yeah, kickball, I think that's more popular than, and I know this is awfully shrunken down, looks to me like a playground. So I don't know, is there like a junior, some sort of smaller baseball style without an outfield, you know what I mean? For at least the playground space so the kids could use it. Laid on top of this field somehow. Dr. Conti.
No, I think you can continue with the field conversation.
Okay.
I had a question about G1 and G2.
Oh, okay. Mrs. Priest.
I was also wondering about the PE curriculum and if they utilize the baseball field for any sports, if there could, it looks like closer to the field where the two look like four squares are, if something could kind of be put in there where the multi-use field can still exist, but you kind of have like a home plate designation, and then they could go into field space. I don't know, I'm just throwing out an idea there, that it won't hopefully interfere with the multi-use field, but I'm wondering about that piece as well with physical education and then how much the kids do use that space. I also think mine loops back to maybe what Dr. Conti with the G1, G2, but cost-wise, is there a big cost difference with not having to blast out that area to level it out or whatever we need to do for that bus loop was popped into my mind as well.
There's definitely a cost associated with clearing out the trees and the grading because it does
start to slope up in that area and then slopes back down.
Thank you.
No hands raised.
So I had a question real quick. Trying to had my hand up for a little bit. Just put it down. So going back to the softball field discussion, are we saying the athletic director didn't want it because it wasn't two full-size fields, or what was the concern? Because it was kind of broke up when you spoke about that.
Jeremy, this is Bob Keeney. So yes, that is the comment from the athletics director that particularly for his events, when I say his, for the school department's events, he would prefer to have two full-size softball fields that both varsity and JV could be on at the same exact time instead of splitting up the teams. He didn't comment on rec's usage on it because, we got that comments from the rec department.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I know from the recreation department meeting, it was definitely option 3 that they wanted, and the reason they liked it most because it gave you 3 U's, the full lacrosse field, and a place for baseball too. So I mean, if we could incorporate the baseball in there, it'd be preferred. I understand, it's not necessarily one of the athletic department, but because this is going to be a community piece of property, I think we should maximize that space as much as we can since we've shifted, the parking spaces.
Jordan?
I'm hearing baseball and softball and Little League interchange. Are they all the same size fields?
They're not the same size. Baseball's bigger, but Little League is the same size as softball. And it's about 200 feet down the line to the outfield fence.
And when we're talking about these fields, is the diamond that we're seeing in these options softball or baseball?
It's softball.
Softball.
And while we're clarifying, they said one is no good, you have to have 2 because teams always play in two diamonds.
Say JV and varsity together.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to understand. Okay.
May I go back to G1 and G2?
Sure.
Vivian, I just want to double check and just make sure that G2 are the same, except for the bus loop. I thought I heard Donna say that. Is that, Donna, you're in space, but
So the difference between G1 and G2 is that there is no bus dedicated loop to the north of the traffic circle. There is one other slight difference in that on G2, we added a median strip where the bus drop-off would be, because you do need a protected drop-off area in order for vehicles to pass a bus as it's loading and unloading. They will have their stop signs out, and if you have protection in the way of a median strip, sometimes a bus fence, you are allowed to continue driving past.
but the driveway in is the same width. There'll still be 3 lanes. If we needed to add a median strip to G1, we could do that. I guess I'm always looking for some value engineering options in the future, to Mrs. Priest's point, that if we're going to have to cut some costs, that if I'd rather do a bus loop than a classroom or something. So I guess that's what I'm saying. As long as the two are, again, if they're virtually the same except for the median strip and the bus loop, then that's just what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
While we're back on this, I know we talked about, like, you have the addition already penciled in for the future. Was that on top of the bus loop? Or is it the other end now that it's flipped?
It would be very close. It would extend into the bus loop.
Okay.
It would be very close to it in option
Okay.
G1.
Okay.
Yep.
You know, the other thing that we were thinking about, that if G2 doesn't work out, right, just the way buses arrive and vans arrive, that there are the parking spaces to the rear of the school, and that perhaps vans could use that area back there. We've actually thought about moving those parking spaces, not so that they're directly behind the school, but kind of along the side, and have a nice entrance for those people to enter the building. So, you know, we're always thinking about flexibility, trying to anticipate the unexpected, because as we all know, traffic circulation pattern, this is like the bane of your existence. So we're just trying to make sure that we're providing some form of alternatives if the traffic patterns change in the future.
Question in regards to the traffic loop where the lawn is, and of course, touch my screen there. And then at the corner where the, would be like between 12 and 2 o'clock there. Is there going to be any sort of structure? I know the car shouldn't be going fast around the circle, but is there going to be any sort of structures to prevent vehicles from going where they should not be going?
Yeah, that's certainly something we will continue to study. We often place guardrails in areas such as that so that it prevents cars and vehicles from jumping a curb, for instance, right? It's always about the safety and how we can prevent terrible accidents from happening. So you anticipate and plan for the worst case.
The other thing too that we'll be incorporating are the raised crosswalks at all of the crosswalks. So that too is a speed control measure as well.
So I have a second, because I had my hand up, so we can jump in with a couple quick questions. Is there going to be bollards or some kind of barrier where the entrance is, where the kids are walking into? I assume there is. What's the linear feet of the blue line to put cars on? And then for the walking path, is that an accessibility addition for the building or no?
So the blue arrows indicate the car queuing and where, it's kind of hard to read, where the, so maybe you can point.
I was just trying to get a link to determine like an estimate of how many cars we could put in that loop,
It's about
basically from when they come off until all the way to the other end of the loop.
Sure, it's about 1,000 linear feet of queuing to the point that's closest to the front entrance. And then there's another 250 feet along the, what we're calling kind of a boulevard. It's in LA, which is all pedestrian oriented. And then on the opposite side where either the buses or the vans drop off, again, we would, if it's vans, I think what we would need to do is provide total accessibility for drop-off. So it would likely have bollards at key areas to allow the drop-off and for free access, should it be necessary for wheelchair and anyone who might need that ease of travel.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
And then the last one was just the walking path. Is that for accessibility for students, or is, what was the genesis behind that one?
So the walking path with the trees down the middle, is that what you're?
No, the walking path around the fields.
Around the field.
So actually, when we met with the science department, we talked about outdoor classrooms and access to and around the site. They thought it would be, they were amenable to that. And we also thought it would be a nice way to bring kids around also, for PE, maybe that's a path that the kids can run on. It's just another way to bring kids around the site. And from that point, you can also access the fields. I think when we had a softball field, that path linked to the backstop areas, to the dugouts, because we do absolutely need to provide an accessible path to the play fields. So that's part of it as well.
Yeah, I was just a concern, I'm in support of it. I like the accessibility of it. I just wonder what the draw is going to be for attracting folks during the school day to use that as a walking path for exercise would be my concern, just from a safety standpoint.
That's a really good point. And, we in our perspective, we thought it would be nice to connect to the trailhead down in the southern edge. So that I think is going to be continue to be studied and discussed. It's an opportunity for connections, but it's going to require some further study for sure.
Yep. No, like I said, it's a good feature. It's just how we manage it.
There you go. All right, so with this option G and the fields, we also have a couple of visuals for playground. Oh, you're going backwards. Yeah. There you go. Okay. Actually, if you can go back one, I'm sorry. So our playground that we currently have conceptually laid out, the purple pear shape would be the poured-in-place rubber surfacing where the play structure is. And that is about 9,000 square feet, which would provide ample space to provide a 100% accessible play structure should the town want to go that direction. There's also an opportunity to do 2 smaller playgrounds, but this is a really nice feature that a lot of schools are currently looking at. The area that's kind of the tan color, you can kind of see some 4 squares and a couple of half-court basketball courts, is going to be we would call out for a painted play surface. And this is, there's an opportunity to paint all sorts of fun games for the kids. Not only Foursquare, I don't know if kids still play hopscotch, but there's great opportunity for kids to actually use chalk also for games on the pavement. So right now we're showing that area to be about 15,000 square feet. And on the next slide, we have a couple of samples or examples for projects that we've completed. On the left is the playground for the Shea Memorial Elementary School in Amesbury, a few few of the school folks visited Shea, and it's really a fun playground with great colors. This one is about 17,000 square feet, really ample. It fits a third of the school in here, in this playground. To the right is the Hastings Elementary School in Lexington, and that playground, the lower playground that you see here, is about 14,000 square feet. So what we're showing is pretty ample. Again, much opportunity to develop that further. We would welcome having kids actually provide feedback for what they want to see. So we'll have an opportunity to work with some of the students and teachers if that's something that they're interested in. But we just want to show this for scale. All right, and
Just a question, these surfaces, are they cleared when it snows?
yes, yeah. Yeah, so the reason a lot of folks ask why we have so much asphalt, and it's because in the wintertime, it's much easier to clear these areas for play than for grass. You just so in this case, we have the best of both worlds. You have wonderful fields, and you also have a great opportunity for the paved play surfaces. Oh, and yes, it's never going to snow again.
Thanks for that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for that.
And then the other piece I just wanted to mention, last year we were up in Salem, New Hampshire at one of the newer elementary schools, and they had these very nice basketball hoops that adjusted to height. I even operated it left-handed, one-handed. I have some pictures of them I will share with you later, but I'd like to see some more of that accessibility for the students. I do some of the rec basketball, and a lot of the younger kids have a hard time reaching that 10-foot hoop. So
Yes, yeah, we've heard that as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Jeremy's got his hand up again. Is it still up or new comment, or did you leave it up?
That was accident. I forgot to
Okay,
put it down.
no worries. Roger?
Oh, just a thought on the playground. If you don't actually want to shovel it, run the geothermal loops through it, and it'll melt, and you won't have to shovel it. Of
They
course,
don't quite
it'll increase-
operate that way, but yeah, that's a good idea. Always thinking, that's
The
great.
union would grieve us, yeah.
You'd probably need more geothermal in the ground to do it, but anyway.
There you go, yeah. All right, okay. So concurrently with developing the site, we're also looking at the building, and we wanted to talk a little bit about what is currently here in Burlington, and then see how we relate it to other schools and how you might visualize the new school. We've also reviewed this with some of the school department folks and gotten some really good feedback. So here we have the existing Fox Hill School. Most of the material is masonry, is brick. Brick is a really wonderful, warm, durable material and is really cost effective, and we can do really amazing things with it. There are so many different colors, and there are ways you can treat it. In terms of the face, you can corbel, you can recess. So it's really a great material. In this case, we have brick with some storefront, really a lot of window with insulated panels. This being an old school, there are new ways of doing that now that we would be exploring. Next. So your next newest school is Memorial Elementary School. Again, mostly masonry, mostly brick, with some what we call architectural concrete masonry unit. You'll also hear it called ground face CMU. It has a really nice honed finish, and you can see the aggregate, which is kind of the little stones, and a really nice subtle pattern. And again, there are many different colors. In this case, it's a fairly light color. But again, mostly masonry. The pitch roofs we kind of talked a little bit about with our interior, or actually our exterior working group. It's not conducive to solar panels. The orientation, the way it faces is one way on one side and another way the other. So the most efficient and really the best way to build, and it doesn't seem intuitive, is a flat roof provides you the most surface for PVs, for photovoltaic panels, but it also builds just what you need for a roof. With a pitched roof, you're building more volume inside of it to get to the ceiling height that you need to get to at the window perimeter. So it's really not efficient. You're going to be heating that area because a lot of times we'll put equipment in there and it'll need to be heated so it doesn't freeze in the wintertime. So that's why most of the schools you'll see that are currently built are flat roofs. But that's not to say we don't pitch them a little bit here and there. So next. And then we have Pine Glen, which also very similar to Fox Hill, a lot of brick, but again, storefront panels with insulated panels. What we love about Pine Glen is actually inside the gym and the cafeteria areas, there are these beautiful glulam beams that we would love to be able to replicate in some way or form. As we met with the working group, exterior working group, we talked a little bit about how we can relate to the site with natural materials. The glulam here at Pine Glen is just really beautiful. That if we can pull some of that language into the new Fox Hill, that might be a nice thing to do. Next. And then Francis Wyman, apologies that we couldn't get better photos. Again, there seems to be a theme here, right? A lot of the historic schools have been brick, mostly brick in nature. And again, there's good reason for that because of how we can use it in so many different ways and forms. Next. So David and some of his staff at Fox Hill visited the Shea Memorial Elementary School in Amesbury. This school is a 3-story school, but the photo on the left-hand side is the main entrance and is 2-story at that point. The site drops off in the back, so the image on the lower right-hand corner shows the back side of it, where it is a 3-story and the academic wing is to the right, and that is a full 3 stories. But we thought this was a good example to show how a 2-story can be treated so that it doesn't look like it's just a flat, full 2-story all the way around. We have opportunity to raise some of the roof lines, bring in some natural daylight by glass walls. In this case, we have the library overseeing the entrance, and you'll see the canopy on the upper right-hand photo is the main entrance with a library peeking out of it. And that's a little bit like how we're going to look at treating Fox Hill, where we have the library perched over the main entrance. Next. This is the Hastings Elementary School in Lexington. Again, the main entrance, which is to the right hand of the image on the left, is really a 2-story. It's a tall 2-story. And then as you move over to the left-hand side, which is where the academic wing is a 3-story. So in both the Shea Elementary School and Hastings, the building is primarily masonry, primarily brick. We use ground face concrete block in certain areas. It provides a really good base for materials to sit on. It's very durable when you have snow blowers, snow plows hitting close to the school. It's going to stand up to that. And then we use materials such as, in this case, porcelain panels. That's what you'll see on the lower right-hand image. That's the light gray, as well as some aluminum panels, and then brick in different colors to break up the scale. Next. The Hurl Wyman Elementary School in Woburn, I believe some folks have visited as well, is a little bit more traditional with kind of a base. This is a full 3 stories. The gym is on the left-hand side, and it is a 3-story because the gym is on the second floor. Again, mostly masonry brick. And in this case, the windows are treated a little bit differently, a little more modern. It's what we call curtain wall, which are very tall swaths of glass with aluminum frames, and we use aluminum panels in between the floors that are insulated. Next. And what we do is we also balance the amount of glass to the walls to maintain what we need to maintain to meet our energy code requirements. This is the Douglas Elementary School in Douglas, Massachusetts, primarily aluminum panel, which which back then was actually a very inexpensive material and now is very expensive. So you'll see a lot less of the aluminum panels, but you can do also very fun things with the panels. There are many different colors, things we can do with it, different patterns and shapes. But we do like to use some of the aluminum panels just to kind of show you what can be done. Next. And then finally, the Bancroft Elementary School. This one is not one of our schools. It's SMMA. This is in Andover. And this building is also a 3-story, but you'll see that the front face is really a 2-story. And so it's primarily a flat roof, but then you can kind of see the roof on the right-hand side. That sits over the gym. That has a little bit of lift to it. And then on the left-hand side, they also have a library kind of perched over the main entrance. So this warm orange material is phenolic. It's we've used some of that at the Shea Elementary School in Amesbury. In this case, they used a lot of it around the main entrance and also to the classroom wing. It is not as inexpensive as brick and masonry. It's a little more expensive, but less expensive than metal panel. It's also very warm. All right. Just for reference, this is the floor plan. We're continuing to massage the spaces inside. We've met with David and his staff. We've done some follow-up meetings, and we're going to continue to develop the interiors of the building with regard to elevations inside, materials, because at the end of this schematic design phase, we're going to have a scoping package that will basically define the budget for this project. So remains a 2-story building. Next. And what we've done is now we've started looking at how this building might look 3-dimensionally. So this first image is just if it had no windows, just a block image, what could that look like? It's a very long building. So we are looking at ways to break up that length, and just by angling it a bit, it helps. And also by changing out the roof lines and some of the faces of the buildings move in and out, and having canopies in the front really help a great deal. And then once we start putting some materials on it, it could look something like this. This is very preliminary. We just wanted to give you a sense of the scale of the building, talk a little bit about the materials. When we met with the exterior working group, it seemed that we would like to look at a more modern feel for the building, but perhaps use more traditional materials such as brick in a more modern way. The Shea Elementary School was received really favorably. So a lot of those materials, again, were brick, but a good mix of phenolic and cement panels, cement board panels, which are similar to porcelain. So that is it for our design update.
Project.
I don't know if the enclosure on the roof is indicative. Is there much equipment actually on the roof?
Well, we're just starting to look at the equipment, so there will definitely be an energy recovery unit up there. Whether maybe there's 2, I'm not sure.
There's some air handlers too. We haven't really modeled those yet.
Okay, thanks.
We're starting to coordinate with our mechanical engineers, but there will be more stuff on the roof.
But I think that was Roger speaking. Roger, what we'll do is once we understand the size of the equipment, we'll work with our solar design consultants to make sure that we locate them strategically in areas that will maximize the solar panels on the roof. So we're showing a white roof, guys, but if it's going to have solar panels on it, it's going to look a little different. But yeah.
All right. Thank you.
There were a couple of things in the other photos of the schools that you shared that had some different types of bollards. Right, the Bancroft School had some giant concrete kind of globes. There were more traditional bollards at Hastings. So just continuing that conversation. Yeah. Okay. Onto the truly captivating part of the meeting. Okay. Schedule and budget. So just a quick update of the schedule where we are. The top two rows have been grayed out. The PDP and PSR are now behind us, and we're deep into schematic design. We did kind of plan roughly 2 community meetings through schematic design, so maybe, I don't know if we want to talk about the timing of those. We will be estimating shortly, and we have our MSBA submittal due in June, so maybe it'd be worth just talking quickly about, I think once we have the cost back and right before we submit, is a really good time just to kind of summarize all the work that's been done. I think at this point, maybe it's a discussion about can we fit something in maybe in April, and if at all, talk about trying to garner some comments or feedback of the design at that point. But it has been since just before, I think, November, since the last time we had a bigger community meeting. So I think it's certainly before we submit in June. I think the question is there enough to share and get feedback on for another one?
Yeah, I'm open to conversation. I think that's fine. I definitely think one with, so you're saying we'll have a cost in June?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, we also talked about maybe some sort of joint one with the high school building committee. June makes sense for that, and then
I think the high school did want to try to have one before the summer, just before school's out.
Okay.
People are thinking more summer activities.
Okay.
I know not everybody has the ability and time to join and follow all these meetings. I think what we heard at other community meetings were for some subjects that might be too late in June would be just getting the word out, and, updating more globally on funding timelines, on the overall process, what's next. So there's, as we get closer to the end of this, it really gets honed in on cost and where we're at. But there's, if there's an appetite to do one before that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm fine. I know we have vacation in April.
Yeah, come June, it'll be
Money.
it'll be money, but it'll be a lot of the work the SD has done at that point.
Okay.
So there's a little time to incorporate.
All right, so we want some sort of feedback in April. Okay, that sounds good.
Maybe not quite photorealistic, but
So last week in April is what you're thinking?
Yeah, that would make sense to me. I do never remember when the April vacation is.
The 15th?
Okay. All right. So after that.
So week of the 22nd?
Yeah.
School meeting's the 23rd, I think. So, I'm not sure, do we have a high school meeting the 25th?
Second Thursday.
Second Thursday.
Do we just go all in and go Wednesday night? 24th?
We can use those, probably.
Yeah, just look at the
Do a budget going up, right? So I hear.
Monday, Monday after vacation. So then we could go to the next week. Going to practice the Tuesday there.
The 30th.
school committee meeting that night.
Yeah, we don't have a meeting the 23rd.
You don't?
No, I have it as the 30th and the 9th for April.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
We'll pencil in the 23rd and maybe just
Yeah.
confirm that offline, if that's okay.
Does that work? Sounds good. Yeah, all right.
Great. So just talking about schematic design, a little bit, as mentioned, we have the submittal due to the MSBA in June. The MSBA board meeting is several weeks later in August. And as I mentioned, there's some other cost estimating activity, they're all rolling up to that June submittal. But just to give you an overall picture of where we're at in schematic design relative to when we started back in December, close to or beyond halfway through the work, but we'll extend to August when we meet with the SBA. And then we are showing some of the funding the project activities. There's been a lot of movement in that area in the last week, specifically, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later tonight. But just identifying the fall election dates and the fall town meeting. After assuming that the MSBA votes favorably at their project scope and budget approval meeting in August, what happens is it begins a 120-day window for the town to secure their funding for the project. And that can happen beforehand, but no later than that 120 days. There's two key submittals in that funding the project module after schematic design. That's the project scope and budget agreement. So after the MSBA stamps their approval at the board meeting, they create a project scope and budget agreement, which memorializes project scope and the budget and the schedule for the project. So following the project scope and budget agreement, which gets signed by both parties, and after funding is secured by the town, is what's called the project funding agreement. And that's the next gate to reimbursement with the MSBA. So right now we're in the feasibility study agreement where they've agreed to reimburse a percentage of the feasibility fees, but no more than that. So the project funding agreement following local approval is when the budget will reload and further reimbursement requests.
Steve, if I could just, I think what we want to add on here too is that we have to go back to the FAS.
Yep. There is what we heard at the board approval in February was a request to go back to their facilities assessment subcommittee, FAS, which we did prior to submittal PSR. Because if you remember, we did shortly after submittal kind of flip the building. And none of the program changed, none of the adjacency changed, but that was enough for them to trigger another review by the facilities assessment subcommittee. Having heard them and spoken to the MSBA after that, I'm not particularly alarmed. Don, I don't know if you want to chime in regarding the same. It's really just because of the magnitude of the change, just making sure some of their questions, I think all of them really are the same, have to do with site circulation, safety, drop off, covered entries, that sort of thing, I think will be addressed, but it's sounding more of a formality at this point than anything, but we'll go closer to that maybe.
Yeah, I think flipping the building. I think that's the date.
We'll confirm it.
Yeah. Will the potential parking lot changes like trigger another review, or do you think you're trying to loop it all into this one May date that's coming up?
Yeah, it would be all be looped in. Yeah. I think that's just the natural progression of the study options of parking, but certainly wherever it is at that point would be addressed. I don't know if you feel the same. It's just natural progression of the design within SD. And then just a quick,
one observation on the chart, the lines don't line up but have the same numbers on them. The fall election dates and fall town meeting both say 9/24.
Well, they weren't. They're not the same date.
Right, but they're not lined up. So either the icons are in the wrong, pictures are in the wrong place, or the dates aren't quite right. Not
They're different dates in September. Like one's beginning of September, one's the end.
Yeah, it's month and year.
It's month and year.
Yeah, the 24 is
I was
confusing.
thinking about the day. Okay,
Yeah.
never mind.
Yeah, no, it's trying to be fairly high level, but yeah, it's month, year, so you could have a couple of the same, but kind of slightly separate. Good observation. And then overall project timeline, again, DD design, detailed design through obviously construction. It's becoming a little more clear, only because last time we had this slide, it was options 3, or options 2, 1 through 9, so to speak. So we were showing that construction schedule. We really didn't know which direction we were heading in, but that's becoming a little more clear. I think once we have the discussion about the funding of the project and the order of obligations from the town and the MSBA become a little more clear, we can fine tune this as well. Certainly it doesn't have to be for the schematic design submittal.
Steve, can you go back to that slide one sec? I mean, this is a little bit nitpicky, but I know, had we discussed that it was gonna open in September of 28? Does that change your site work timeline?
I think the construction start and then the construction finish is really all hinged upon when detailed design can start after the funding. So it's a little nitpicky, but it's okay. I think when we were originally forecasting and assuming a debt exclusion in the fall of 24, prolonged when detailed design could start, but it's looking like that might have some opportunity to start earlier. So an earlier detailed design start, the earlier the design is finished, drawings are early, go to bid, start construction, and complete the project. So,
Well, my question is, even if it's ready in February, we're not gonna move into it until probably September, like the end of the school year. So you can't knock it down, knock the old one down. Does that make sense?
yeah, so that's why the construction duration is a little bit beyond the occupying the new building, because that second phase is.
So site work
demolition.
that's factored in, that occupation is not gonna happen in February.
Occupying the school could happen as early as February, but.
I get it, yeah.
But it doesn't happen.
Okay.
What we're trying to do is control, big thing in construction is time in construction means more cost of construction, just the cost of having a contractor on site maintaining labor. So we're trying to control and be reasonable about how quickly we can ask construction to go based on a number of factors, but then also not dragging it out for the sake of just taking more time. So,
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about it in detail, but I've been under the assumption that we were opening in the beginning of the school year, not in February vacation.
so those are all conversations we can have, and that's why they're grayed out. They're not cast in stone. They're much deeper conversations to have as we wrap up and fine tune the schedule through the rest of SD. Quick budget summary update. Here's the 4 categories that we're working within as we are today. The updated budget amounts, contract amounts, and expended amounts are all up to date as of this week. And the invoices and contract obligations in front of you tonight are not reflected in this, so they'd be updates to this, but it's just a quick snapshot. Any questions about schedule or budget, curiosities?
I just have a question about the totals on the budget summary. The 297% committed, 288% expended. Is that just a formula?
It's just a formula.
Something else.
Yeah, on the table.
All right, you have invoices. Can we do these together?
I think it's okay to do them together. I would just like to preface the first one, Durham Weir, invoice number 18. We caught an error in invoice number 17, which effectively turned out to be an overpayment.
Okay.
So I spoke with Nicole as lately as of today to talk about those amounts. So the amount reflected here is not the amount of invoice 18, it's the amount that includes the overpayment of invoice 17.
Okay.
Invoice 18 was provided in the backup. All the details are interested.
I move we support the following three invoices. Invoice 18 from Dorn Whittier to the amount of, in the amount of $5,832.50. Danisco invoice number 9965 in the amount of $58,333. And Danisco invoice number 9966 in the amount of $4,655.75.
Second.
Any discussion? Bob, I can't see any hands, but. All set? Okay, here we go. Mrs. Bond?
Aye.
Monaco? So Mr. Brooks?
Aye.
Dr. Conti?
Yes.
Ms. Kasha?
Yes.
Mr. Cuna?
Yes.
Because it's your.
Mr. Denizio?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenblatt?
Yes.
Mr. Bolano?
Yes.
Ms. Priest?
Aye.
Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mrs. Monaco, did I catch you?
I'm still here. Yes, aye.
Okay. And I vote aye.
12-0-0, go ahead.
Yep. Thank you.
Still need to do that. I was doing it anyway.
Oh, no, sorry. Bob stuffed me the paper.
Sure, I'll stop.
All right. Oh, commitments are different.
We review contract amendments to review. First is Dorn Whittier Amendment number 3, which includes 2 items. One is for continued website language translation services that we started a year ago. So that's a renewal. And the second part of that is for us to contract with PM&C, our construction cost estimators, who provided the cost estimate last round to do a schematic design estimate and to reconcile with Danisco's estimate. So in total, it's 2,100.
I move that we commit to the following 2 commitments. Dorn Whittier Amendment number 3 in the amount of $18,118 for website translation as described, and then Danisco Amendment number 4 in the amount of $6,380 for roof and deconstructive testing services.
Second.
All right, here we go again. Bob? Mrs. Monaco? It's you. Oh, is everyone?
Nope. Nope.
Mr. Brooks?
Aye.
Dr. Conti?
Yes, aye.
Mrs. Kasha?
Yes.
Mr. Cuna?
Yes.
Mr. Denizio?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenblatt?
Yes.
Mr. Bolano?
Yes.
Ms. Priest?
Aye.
Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Try Mrs. Bond again,
Yes.
and Mrs. Monaco?
Yes.
I am an aye, so another 12-0-0. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Item 7 on the agenda, review and rescind Fox Hill property rezoning article. This is a joint meeting between the school committee and the school building committee, so this is one that's been highlighted as a school committee vote. This is all relative to a request in conversation with planning board in a zoning restriction that restricts diesel generators in a residential neighborhood. So I'm just trying to provide some background to this article specifically.
Steve, I think it restricts the storage.
Correct, diesel fuel, yep. It was our impression that, after speaking with planning, that there was an option to potentially rezone. Currently, the Fox Hill property is zoned as residential. And it was one avenue to explore, allowing flexibility. The reason why we're so interested in replacing the existing natural gas generator on site with diesel is that it allows natural gas generator or any natural gas piping to the site would not allow the town to take part in a federal grant for, a state grant through Mass Save for the ground source heat pumps and a number of other incentives. So they're trying to restrict part of their guidelines and their restriction from the federal restrictions that they're unable to allow natural gas to be piped to the site. And so the only alternative to provide a backup or emergency generator would be diesel. So as Melissa had mentioned, that zoning restriction would prevent us from taking. We started with 4 or 5 different options or avenues to pursue. We're now down to 3. I'll try to summarize what those are. The first is still to rezone the property, but doing it in a manner that's consistent with bylaws, legal, which we all want to make sure we're doing. And that would happen at fall town meeting, which originally was the plan, but we thought the winter had already passed, so we tried to get it to Springtown meeting. So the first would be to rezone it, but do it in a different manner. That was the second avenue would be to technically have a diesel generator, but it's becoming more clear that there's non-hazardous options for diesel fuel, like the hydrogenated vegetable oil. So if the issue is storage of hazardous materials on site in a residential neighborhood, in that fuel type, though it's technically a diesel generator, is running on non-hazardous fuel, that would be the other avenue. Some obstacles to get through, including just the availability and viability, and convincing the folks that provided those grants that no actual diesel, or zoning, no actual diesel would be used in that generator in that instance. And then the third would be the battery packs. So the more traditional route, which we often see in schools, in older vintage, is just purely battery backup, localized for emergency lighting, and always battery packs on emergency lights. So rather than
Yeah, Steve.
Backup generator, doing that more locally.
Yeah, Steve, if we could just interject, we met with DOER this week hoping that there was a misunderstanding there, but the answer is a resounding no. They just don't want the gas on the site or connected to any new construction. So we're preparing a memo to share with everyone. We just had the meeting, so we weren't able to get it all together to give you your options, right? If it's just battery packs, it's not like energy storage battery. It's actually batteries that you would put in exit signs and things like that. And so we're putting together a summary that will talk through the different options. And the last option is unfortunately go with gas and forego the mass save incentive. But we're putting that all together that would explain what would be on the different ones, different options.
So, Madam Chair, do you know roughly how much the mass save credit is?
It's over $1 million.
7 figures, yeah.
Okay.
Like 1.3, I think. It's all based on utilizing ground source heat pumps. Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Dr. Conte asked my question.
Okay.
So to recap,
Yeah.
it's a motion and a vote by the school committee to withdraw that zoning request.
It's a school committee, so I'm gonna need a motion on the phone.
Melissa.
Oh, sorry, George, go ahead.
I'll make the motion. I'll second it.
Okay. Go ahead, George.
I have a question about the timing. I mean, is this something where we can still go ahead with the plans for design and the plans for funding and have, I don't know, a pad for a generator and work out the timelines for the generator piece separately? Like in parallel?
Yeah, so the decision of which fuel type or which method for any kind of backup isn't going to derail the project at all. So if the question is, what can we do to build in flexibility as we go, we will certainly do that. I think all this is we have some time to figure out between now and if in fact it's going to be a zoning article, to work that into fall town meeting and go through the necessary process. Between now and then, I think there's a lot of conversations. Donna mentioned summarizing the methods in a memo, talking with planning. The flexibility will be there. It's just at the end of the day, if we want to take advantage of the incentives, we have no flexibility to, as Donna confirmed, on the federal government to allow natural gas to the site. So
Put my hand up.
Yeah, I mean, we could put it in and we don't get the zone change, we don't get the $1 million, right? Yeah.
And speaking with planning earlier today, it seems the message we received was that, as far as anything that can be done planning wise within the boundaries of the zoning bylaws, it sounds like they're a partner and they just want to understand what is available. So we are on the planning board's agenda for April 4th. So we're going to continue that conversation. I think it's a little bit of going over the timeline with them in terms of what the state process needs to unfold, and then fold in the local process in terms of planning, zoning, or any site plan approval. So we're still in a little bit of just understanding timeline-wise what each of the stakeholders needs, and then kind of folding them together to understand, the order in which we have to go.
Again, Madam Chair, I do want to recognize that the planning board has been represented at the external committee meetings by Bill Gaffney. So the planning board has been at the table with us having these conversations. So we've appreciated his input, and then hoping that's again translated back to the full planning board, so they're fully aware of what's going on.
Awesome. So the motion's on the table, seconded. So any more discussion to just rescind the zoning article that was submitted?
Just because it was submitted on behalf of the school committee, only the school committee is voting on rescinding this article. That was the advice that we got.
I don't have to like open a separate meeting, right? Okay, no, all right.
Can we just have clarification on who made the motion and who seconded?
Christine Monaco made the motion and Kevin Bond seconded. Yeah. All right, we'll vote on it. Mrs. Bond,
Aye.
Mrs. Monaco,
Aye.
Mr. Brooks,
Aye.
and I'm aye. 400 on the school committee.
Donna, if I could just ask for one piece of information as we do that memo for the committee's benefit, just if we can understand the cost and capability trade-offs between the different options, and obviously the impacts to reimbursements as well.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have a fun conversation, but it's a trade-off for sure.
Sure.
Next item on the agenda, discussion of available dates for debt exclusion. As we were trying to iron out the process for local approval, as shared in the earlier timeline with MSBA and funding dates. We had a meeting with Town Clerk Amy, and she explained that, as we understood it, that the project was going to require debt exclusion in the fall. Even since the formation of the agenda and discussions last week, this topic's changed a little bit. So I know we have a colleague here that explained a little bit more about that, but originally we were anticipating a vote by the school committee to recommend a date for the vote for the debt exclusion. Again, just maybe confirming the local process to make that recommendation, ultimately coming from Ways and Means and Select Board. So this was procedurally just to get that vote, which we no longer need. Conversation that I shared to our colleagues with Ways and Means. Wants to take it from here.
John,
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. I did put together a little presentation on this. Ways and Means has been working with the administration a fair amount, just looking at the debt process overall and the Fox Hill project in particular. I'll be talking a little bit about the police station just because it falls into the overall conversation and provides some context, so that I understand that's not something that you're worrying about here specifically. Great, Bob has the presentation up there. I met with the school committee back in October, and we talked a bit about Proposition 2.5 and some of their projects. So I'll zoom through that part of the presentation a little more quickly, but stop me if you want to recap on anything. So if we go to the first slide, the point of this is just showing why are we even talking about debt exclusions when we haven't really dealt with that in the town much before. So if we look at past projects, you can see the summary there, but the bottom line is they're all in the range of $8 to $32 million is what we're talking about. We go to the next slide on potential projects. We can see that the projects we're envisioning now are in the $45 to $92 million range, or a little more actually, but basically 3 times where we've been in the past. So that's why things that used to fit a little more easily into the budget are requiring a bit more conversation than they have in the past. So that's where this is all coming from. If we go to the next slide, just quickly looking at the police station, I think you all understand this building's over 100 years old. And as a result, there's a lot of old systems, leaks and mold and so on. So I think we understand why we're looking to replace that. That was approved for a feasibility study back in September of 22. We're looking to expand that roughly on site. We go to the next one, the Fox Hill project. You're all obviously very familiar with that. I think a couple key things there are the feasibility, just for the audience, the feasibility study is $1.5 million, because as you know, MSBA has a much more prescribed process and requires us to be much further down the pike to get their funding approval. So in particular, one of the things I'll emphasize is, we've been looking at, $33 million for MSBA funding, hopefully still $5.5 million for the energy incentives. And so I think the key thing for a town to understand is that, this is adding up to over a third of the total project cost. And there's no guarantee that, this level of support is going to be there in the future. We've heard various people suggest, not here, why don't we wait a year or two? And, this is one of the reasons you don't want to wait a year or two. The other one is the fact that town meeting approved a feasibility study over 2 years ago. So it's a very long process to decide all of a sudden to put the brakes on and get back to later on. And just looking down the pike, I think we all understand that the high school is undergoing feasibility study now that the town meeting has approved. And we want to be careful in general not to stack up all our large projects to happen simultaneously, just from a debt and funding point of view. If we go to the next slide. As I mentioned, I talked a fair amount about Proposition 2.5 a number of months ago. I'll just give the highlights here. Is that there's this concept of levy limit, which is how much the town can potentially tax both residential and commercial together. And that Proposition 2.5 allows that to increase every year by 2.5%, plus any new growth, where new growth is defined as new taxable property that is put in service in the town. The key thing is that what's not included in that is inflation. So if we have years where there's 6-7% inflation, that levy limit only goes up by that 2.5% still. So that puts some pressure on things that we have to be aware of. And then the final point is that there's this concept of excess levy capacity, which is that levy limit, which is the amount you're allowed to tax, and the actual levy that the town imposes. Right now, our excess capacity is about 13 million, which is a very good and healthy place to be, which means that if for some reason the town wanted to increase its taxes by $13 million in 1 year, we could do that without requiring Proposition 2.5 override. Go to the next slide. The graphic here is just a good reminder. It shows how this all works. There's the levy limit base, which is what the limit was the previous year. The 2.5% gets added on top of that, as you see. Any new growth, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, which turns out to be a very key factor in how this work plays out. And then any overrides and debt exclusions get added to that, essentially. We go to the next slide. First, looking at Prop 2.5 override, this is not what we're talking about doing now, but I'm bringing it up because I want to emphasize why we really don't want to be having Proposition 2.5 overrides. A 2.5 override is a permanent increase to the levy limit. So it gets added to the levy limit, and then that carries forward year to year. I'll make one correction to the slide here. I literally just found out a few hours ago, which is this is put on the ballot by a majority of the select board, not a 2/3 vote. So it requires 3 of the select board to put this on the ballot. And so a couple of key things there. One is town meeting has nothing to do with putting it on the ballot. And what's on the ballot is very prescribed language. There's no opportunity for us to put in clarifying comments and angle it towards any particular outcome. The state law requires us to use very specific language there. Then in order for that to pass, it requires a majority vote of the town. So a lot of communities in Massachusetts have done this, but the key thing is that there's only a 41% pass rate, looking at all the data historically when you crunch through everything that's happened. So a less than even chance that if you roll the dice on a 2.5 override, that's going to pass. Burlington has never attempted to do this before. We go to the next slide. What we are talking about is 2.5 debt exclusion. And an exclusion will increase the levy limit just for the life of the bond. That could be, typically 20 years or so. So it's not a short period of time, but after that bond is paid off, the exclusion adder to the levy limit goes away. This does require a 2/3 vote of the select board in order to put it on the ballot. Again, town meeting has nothing to do with putting it on the ballot. And again, the language is very prescribed. There's no opportunity to use essentially anything other than what the state says you can use. Now, the actual expenditure needs to be authorized by town meeting, and because it's a bonding issue, it requires a 2/3 vote. Then, once it's on the ballot, it goes to a town vote where a majority of town would have to pass it. And this vote can be both either before or after town meeting authorizes the expenditure. Again, a lot of communities have attempted debt exclusions, and these have a 90% pass rate in Massachusetts. So the odds of these in a generic town are reasonably good that they'll pass. Now, unfortunately, the experience in Burlington has been that they don't pass. We've attempted it twice. Last one was over 21 years ago. So the first one was a near miss, almost passed, and the second one not so close. I'll point out that we ended up doing essentially similar projects despite the debt exclusion not passing. If we go to the next slide, so that's all by way of background. So now getting a little more into the meat of the matter, we looked at modeling some various budget scenarios, and this will lead into the recommendations that we're going to make. If we look at, so I mentioned that new growth is a pretty key factor. If we look in the average growth column here, if we look at the growth of the tax base in town over the last 4 years, the average is a little over 1.9%. Our budget growth over the last 4 years has been about 4.85%. So the question is, if you project that forward, what happens? And the good news is, in this average case, even without a debt exclusion, that our excess levy capacity is still positive, which is a good thing, for more than 12 years. And having a debt exclusion on both the police and Fox Hill would extend that yet even further. But the key thing is that it's a fairly long time before we would have to worry in the average case. So depending on things to work out, average is always a risky assumption and nothing that any accountant would ever support. So a more conservative growth estimate is to look at over the last 14 years, which is what we happen to have easy data for. If you take a 3-year average over that time, using a 3-year window, the lowest growth we've had in a 3-year window is 1.62% per year. So we said, okay, knock that down to 1.5% just to be a little more conservative. And if we model that with the average growth of the budget that we've had over the last 4 years, we come up with a picture that says if there are no debt exclusions for these 2 new projects, Fox Hill and Police Station, that in 6 years our excess levy capacity would go away. And what does that mean? That means that with that set of assumptions in 6 years, if we want to have that budget growth to support the fact that we have contracts where people get pay raises and so on, that we would need to go to a Proposition 2.5 override just to get our operational budget funded. And as we've seen historically, that's a less than 50%. It's only that 41% chance that that would pass for a typical town of Massachusetts. So we really don't want to be in a position where just to get our basic budget passed, never mind building new things, we have to go to town each year and say, look, we need to have our budget go up by more than that 2.5% plus new growth that's allowed, or else we can't do just a level funded set of services that you've come to want from the town. So that's a very difficult place to be. We want to avoid that if at all possible. Now, if we do have a debt override on both Fox Hill and the police, then under that, even under those conservative assumptions, it's now roughly doubled. Where it's 11 years before we would have to worry about that excess levy capacity going away and having to do Prop 2.5 override. So what do we conclude from that? From a financial point of view, that the debt exclusions aren't required for these two projects because it's, even without them, it's still 6 years before we run into issues. So, we're not in a panic mode where, we have to, quickly do things without thinking. We have time to work through it. But from a financial, fiscally responsible point of view, we would like to see the debt exclusion so that we have that budget headroom so that we are saying, okay, look, we have at least an 11-year runway under reasonable assumptions. And that gives us plenty of time to plan for the future. The other thing that comes out of this is that the police station being roughly 45 million costs to the town estimated, and Fox Hill being estimated, I think, at 61.5 last I saw. So it's only a third larger than the police station. So these two projects both have had feasibility studies done or approved by town meeting. They're both of similar size. So from a fiscal point of view, they should be handled in exactly the same way in terms of debt exclusions and so on. So other than political reasons, there's no reason to have these be treated differently. So I've heard people from both committees say, we don't want a debt exclusion, let the other guys have one. And the police building committee has said the exact opposite. So that's strictly a political discussion. There's no legitimate fiscal point of reason to take that position. They should be treated the same way. So that brings us to the recommendations. So this has been voted on and agreed to by Ways and Means. The first one is to move forward on both the police station and Fox Hill projects, with neither being dependent on a debt exclusion. So in particular, we would want to have a debt exclusion vote, but not have the projects be dependent upon it. Schedule town meeting bonding votes, which require that 2/3 to pass, as the projects are ready to do it. For police, that would be the May town meeting this year. And for Fox Hill, it would be September town meeting. Then schedule the debt exclusions, which again are not required for projects and they shouldn't be dependent upon it, but are desirable for the April 2025 town election. So I'll point out a few things. The debt exclusion, only because I've heard many folks draw incorrect conclusions from this. Debt exclusion pass-fail has no effect on what tax increase would be required for the projects. If the projects need to be done, there's a certain tax impact on that. Whether it's debt exclusion applies to the levy limit, it does not affect that change. This date avoids conflicting with the presidential election. So the presidential election has been stated as, why don't we do it then? It's our highest turnout election. People like that, and there's certainly an argument for that. I think the counter argument is that during the presidential election, people are very rightfully focused on things like electing a president. Senator Warren's term is up, electing a new senator. All the House of Representatives is up for election. There's a lot of other things that people are focused on, and rightfully so, as being key national issues. So what I think is important is that we're not just looking for a large turnout. What we're looking for is a large turnout of engaged, informed voters. So I think in a presidential election, you're going to get a lot of people who know exactly who they want to vote for president, for their representatives, for their senator. They may not know what the term debt exclusion even means because it's not what they've been focusing on. And so what we want to avoid is having a large block of voters that are just voting because they see a word that alarms them on the ballot that we haven't been able to get a fully informed electorate on. And again, there's no clarifying it via massaging the ballot question. It has to be the exact phraseology that the state requires. So the town election is not surprisingly a very natural choice for town issues. If you're engaged with town issues and interested in them, then going to the town election is a fairly obvious thing to do. And, I think arguments in the past where, I work on Saturdays or for whatever reason cannot make it to that election are no longer really valid with both early voting and mail-in voting. Folks can do this at their convenience. Anyone who is engaged with the process, cares about town issues, should have no difficulty voting. The opportunities are all there. It doesn't need to happen on a specific day. The final note I'll just throw up there, so there's no confusion, is that future large projects, such as the high school, which we imagine is going to be a pretty large number, we should all definitely be prepared that the debt exclusion will be a requirement for that, or else we just won't be able to fit that within our levy. So just be prepared for that. If we go on to the final slide, the same data is presented in a timeline. If we look at the police station on the left, we see the town meeting bonding vote happening at the May town meeting, and then the debt exclusion vote in the April town election. And if we look in the right column, we have the Fox Hill school. And I think February 28th, we had that go-ahead vote from MSBA, which was very encouraging. And then I made the same mistake as Roger and took it as August 24, but it's August. Oh, it is August 20. Okay, so confusingly, it's 8/24/24 that MSBA board approval would occur, hopefully. And then, as mentioned, we have 120 days for the town to fund that. So naturally, bring that up for September town meeting works very well. Where the bonding vote would happen and hopefully pass. And then because it no longer needs to happen within that 120-day window, because we're recommending not making the funding dependent upon debt exclusion, the debt exclusion be done in the same town election for all the reasons we mentioned in April 2025. So this is what Ways and Means is it has supported and plan to present to the select board for our recommendations. And that is all.
Thank you. I have one clarifying question because obviously we've been going down the debt exclusion path for many months now. You're presenting this to the select board and the select board makes the final decision?
So select board has the authority to put a debt exclusion on the ballot. They're the ones that make the ultimate decision. School committee can make recommendations, certainly Ways and Means can make recommendation, but in town meeting, can say what they want, but select board is the only group that has the actual authority to put on the ballot and specify the language on the ballot.
There's a hand online.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Eiler, thanks for the presentation. Lots of information always. Just a couple of comments. I'm just wondering how Ways and Means, came to the recommendation it did, because it seems like the path we're going down in 6 years puts us close to needing the 2.5 override, and puts us much closer to doing that, which is much harder to pass. So just concerned about how we got there. And then, the timeline is a little curious to me, because you mentioned several times that there's political discussions, but it seems like it's kind of massaging the voting pool instead of allowing a larger pool of folks to vote. So I just kind of wonder where that was coming from as well.
Can I chime in here, John?
Absolutely, Roger.
So Jeremy, just for background, one of the subcommittees of Ways and Means is Town Hall 1 that works with the administration, has been, for a long time about the overall financial picture. And we've had a couple of subcommittee meetings discussing this long-term bonding situation. John developed a rather sophisticated spreadsheet that allowed us to try out different numbers for various growth things and assumptions about inflation and costs. And so we spent a fair amount of time looking at that and trying to find the right parameters to make a reasonable projection for the future. There's different people have different views about how conservative versus optimistic you have about picking those parameters. So as John mentioned at the beginning of things, our average growth was up in which is at 1.9%. And we backed off on that in terms of using the numbers for critical thresholds. We certainly expect that every year, or when we look at these materials, that we will see better numbers than the pessimistic 1.5. And so I think we are all generally very positive that we won't hit it in 6 years, that we won't get that far. And so, so I think we've got a good base to build on. And like many of our other the town's long-term commitments, we look at them every couple of years and we reevaluate the parameters. And generally, we've been seeing that, the deadlines have been pushed out. So I think we're in good shape on that. As for the sort of the political judgment, I think there's probably still a lot of discussion to happen, which the selectmen will certainly hear about this view about which election the debt exclusion should be paired up with. I don't expect that discussion to end with Ways and Means recommendation. So feel free to advocate for whatever view you think makes sense to you.
Yeah, sure. No, and then thank you for the clarification, Roger. Again, not an indictment on anyone's work, just, I was trying to understand how we got here with a little more detail. And, for as far as the voting goes, again, if we're going to wait several months, how do you keep this topic in the forefront of the voters? And then, what additional education is going to be done that we think, warrants this large gap? But again, that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, Jeremy, it's a really good conversation. What's the right answer on this? And one of the things I did just a little before the meeting here was I was curious how elections have gone in the past. And just from the town clerk's site, you can see that turnout for town elections is about 15-16%. In the presidential election, the last one was 87%. So it's, in terms of raw numbers, there's no doubt that there's more people involved there. One of the things I thought was interesting, looking at CPA, was one of the, what I would say, one of the most highly advocated issues that the town has had in a while. The 2018 state general election had a turnout of 70%. And then the 2022 state general election, which was where we had CPA on the ballot, was only 62%. So despite what I would say was a huge amount of education, BCAT interviews and debates, things in the paper, turnout actually was lower for whatever reason. So the conclusion I have there is, as much as we try to create a well-informed electorate, it's pretty hard to move the needle on getting people informed and turned out. I would love to hear better approaches to doing that.
Question, I assume that there is a large spreadsheet. So I see in your scenarios, you played with the average growth, average and then conservative, but you didn't play, at least in this, I don't see a difference in budget growth. And given we're going through budgeting right now, and I think the 4.5% guidance has been kind of difficult to hit, especially with the inflation. Is there a scenario with higher budget growth, and how many years that allows us?
Yeah, so in very tiny print at the bottom of the slide that you may have difficulty seeing on that budget scenarios, there's actually a URL for the spreadsheet that Roger referenced. And there are a huge number of variables. You can plug in whatever number you want there. We did play a little bit. I didn't present it here. I did play a little bit with higher budget growth and so on. If you bump that number up to 5.5, if I recall correctly, it chopped a year off, if I recall. So it clearly higher budget growth absolutely will affect it. A good just something to be aware of is if you have 1.9% new growth, which is the average number, and you have an automatic 2.5% that you get by Prop 2.5, if you add those two numbers together, you get a little over 4.4%. So that says if your budget growth was 4.4%, you could go forever and never run out of excess levy capacity. So that's we're operating just slightly above that point, is the thing to note. So at 4.8, we're eating into that about 0.5% a year. At 5.5, it's a little more. That's where we're going to see, I suspect, as time goes on, that there'll be pressure to want to keep that budget growth from, not shooting up. The 4.5% guideline, I understand, is a challenge, and I know that there are new contracts being negotiated, which always pushes up against that. There is the reality that there is this limit of what we can do under Prop 2.5. It's very hard to get overrides. While this year's budget guideline is actually higher than we've had in the past, it's not sustainable for that to happen forever. I think there's a lot of, if anyone who's been to town meeting can see that there's a lot of pushback to increasing those budgets. So that's why this year, we understood with contracts and so forth that there was going to be some pressure required, probably slightly higher guideline. In general, I don't think that's a sustainable position, it's a challenge for future years.
I don't really want to kind of restate exactly what John said, but the non-sustainable word is very important. If you look at growth in town and the growth in budgets and what's going on in the commercial side of things, the commercial side of things pays 60% of the taxes in town. We have to keep the commercial side vibrant and growing and growing. We can't just do it on residential property values increasing. So the goal has been, we've been trying for years, the goal has been level services. There's such a pressure in many departments and many activities to push them up. More teachers, more rec departments, more here, more there. And so anyway, keep that in mind. That's the regular operating side of the budget is we just can't do keep doing the same thing we've been doing.
No, so I really want to push on that because so you're suggesting here that if we do these projects, we're gonna have less room for growth in services, correct?
Without the exclusions.
Correct. But I guess my ultimate question is the debt exclusions are recommended, but we don't want to do one before we decide to move forward with the project.
I would say it differently. I would say that the debt exclusions are highly recommended from a fiscal point of view. We don't feel that they're required to the point that projects should be contingent upon them. And, you know, to your other point, there's always a trade-off ultimately on capital projects versus operating budget. But one of the things that, and just so it's clear, we have a AAA bond rating, which is the best that we can have. But one of the things that the rating agencies have told us is that the town has underinvested over time. It's going to sound a little weird, but the feedback they gave us is your debt service is too low. And it's not that they obviously don't want us to have a lot of debt just for debt's sake, but the implication is by having that low debt service, it means you're not investing in your capital infrastructure as much as you should be. So they're looking and saying, you have low debt, and we notice you have a 100-year-old police station. We notice that your schools have, the older ones have been built in the 60s. Can you squeeze another few years out of them? Absolutely. Do you want to do that indefinitely? No. So the point is that in order to avoid problems in the future, we need to have a reasonable capital plan. We need to be investing in our infrastructure so that we can maintain good places, so that we actually have a place for teachers to teach in that they want to teach in. And we want to do that in a way that spaces them out. I think, with MSBA, I think it was very reasonable that we rolled the dice and tried to get the high school funded. And unfortunately it didn't pan out. But one of the effects of that is it did pile up our projects a little bit. So I think that, that's one of the reasons we want to go forward with these things that have a clearly articulated need. And it's perfectly normal. The reason we have a representative town meeting is that town meeting is hopefully more informed than the general electorate because they're spending their time really diving into the issues and are actually sitting through half-hour presentations to understand things, which is, not something we can necessarily expect everyone to do because, they don't have the time, and that's why they elect people to do it for them. We have a lot of things that town meeting decides to do. In fact, all of our projects are things that town meeting has decided to do. We don't bring every issue to general electorate to decide for the same reason that every time we want to, started a new defense program, we don't bring it to a popular vote of the entire United States. The point is we need, by requirement, we have to bring debt exclusion to a town vote, and that's why we're doing it. But I don't think we want to make the projects dependent on that.
But your argument is that you don't want to bring it to a vote, but you're going to just bring it to a vote later, right?
No. My argument is that in order to get a debt exclusion, you have to bring it to a vote. There's no choice.
Yeah. Could you look at the rates in which the commercial sector is leaving? We have just had a 3% increase in our water bills. I know at least 4 family members who have had companies who are in Burlington not renew leases. And was that factored into these numbers?
We understand where the commercial sector is going. Our assumption is that it's not going away, but we need to do things to encourage them to stay and to grow. And we've done several things there. You know, the last few years, the town's hired an economic development director who's instituted a number of programs to help grow business. I think overall the town has done a good job of pivoting to new technologies. For, you know, the biotech industry is something that until recently wasn't a big thing, and we've seen some significant growth there. So I think, you know, it's important that we understand, you know, I think, you know, a number of decades ago, it was a genius move to bring in the mall and all the retail business. And, you know, we really rode that quite well. And then I think the growth in all our office space was yet another genius move. You know, we have a lot of that in town, and we've ridden that for quite a while. Now that we're seeing that, you know, Class B and Class C office space isn't the growth industry it used to be, I think pivoting to things like biotech is yet another very good move that is starting to pay off. So, you know, I think we're doing the right kind of things across town with an economic director, with having the significant rezoning activities that are going on in the mall corridor in particular, and thinking about how we might want to rezone things. I think that is all steps in the right direction.
Those things take time, and I'm talking about the things that are happening right now with the businesses that are not renewing leases that are going to effectively direct these budgets. We have insurance rates, premiums going up, the employees rate increases through contracts that are barely match half of that. Things are more expensive. Fox Hill was, the police station was slated for a lot less 10 years ago, or how many years ago they put on the capital budget, and we couldn't predict COVID, but building costs have significantly increased. And I would love to think that these numbers are close, but it feels like we're like trying to buy something that we know we're not going to be able to afford for the full term.
I think, you know, it's always good to be careful about this stuff. No argument there. I think we've seen, first off, I want to dispel sort of an implication of what you're saying there. If we look at local receipts, you know, which is, I know, an issue that people have brought up, they've been increasing since COVID. And in fact, it's almost back to where it was pre-COVID at this point. So our revenues have been increasing ever since COVID hit. We took a 1-year big hit on COVID, no doubt about it. So that's all going in the correct direction. While we would like to see, you know, phenomenal growth numbers, we are actually still seeing good growth numbers in both our residential and commercial tax base. Those numbers are increasing. It's not like they're decreasing. So as I mentioned, you know, just looking at those worst case 3-year averages, even at that number, which has only happened once, we still have a reasonable runway ahead of us. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be thinking about the things you're talking about, and we absolutely are. But it would be incorrect to suggest that we're in some downward death spiral here. You know, we have the numbers are currently going up, if anything. There's no doubt that, you know, as you mentioned, water rates, that's entirely due to the fact that the commercial sector is using less water. And the commercial sector has been subsidizing our water rates for residents. Basically, the commercial sector pays essentially full boat on their water rates, and the commercial sector and the residential sector is heavily subsidized. So not surprisingly, if commercial water use goes down, that's going to hit the overall base of support for that, and that's where that number is coming from. But you know, I think in general, I think you know, the town administration has done an excellent job in giving us some good fiscal health. You know, again, we have a AAA bond rating. We have roughly $31 million in free cash, which is a pretty enviable position. We have, I think, approximately $11 million stabilization fund. These are all very good places to be. We need to obviously be careful. But I think the wrong decision would be to say, let's not do this school now, forget about the $38 million in incentives, and wait a few years, because I think we can all predict that building costs are probably going to go up. Restarting the process that you all have spent last over 2 years on would be a pretty expensive thing in terms of effort. We're not likely to, if we restart this, say 5 years from now, to come up with a dramatically different answer. It's all of a sudden going to be vastly cheaper somehow. We're still going to need to support the same number of students. We're going to need to deal with all the exact issues you've been through. And we're unlikely to get a larger level of support in terms of incentives. And on top of that, if something like the high school project comes along, trying to do both, directly on top of each other, that is an irresponsible way to handle things. The whole key with these things is to phase them in, so that new projects are started a little bit over time. And we don't give a huge tax whammy in 1 year to the residents where they say, gee, all of a sudden we're working on 3 new projects. Why my taxes skyrocket this year? I think the responsible thing is to phase them in. And that's, what we specifically been modeling with the whole debt process. And as Roger mentioned, we spent a lot of time over the last few months with administration to really hash through a lot of these issues to make sure that we're not doing a knee-jerk reaction. We're not panicking because we see something that could happen in worst case 6 years from now, but we're planning for it. We're thinking about what's the best way to use that free cash. We can apply some of that to, paying down some of this debt and to ease the burden going forward. So you're raising very valid issues, but they're absolutely things that we're thinking about, and I think we're addressing in reasonable ways.
Are you implying that you don't plan to fund the high school in a similar timeline?
Not at all. What I'm saying, I would say 2 things with high school. One is, I think you guys have the building committee, not quite the same you guys. It's going to take a little bit of time before you come out with a plan for that. You tell me, my understanding is that, it's probably at least a year or 2 behind where we are with Fox Hill, presumably. I don't think we're going to be putting shovels in the ground on the same date, with our current schedules. It's going to presumably take some time to go through this full feasibility process with the high school, decide what to do. It wouldn't shock me to see the high school ending up being some kind of phased project. There's a lot more difficulty of, finding a place where to put the high school. So it strikes me as a possible scenario that some kind of renovate/rebuild in place in some phased thing that allows us to stay in the building as we do whatever it is we decide we want to do, would be a very reasonable approach. And I think the implication of that is that it probably indicates that the expenses would also be phased very similar to that project. That's just my speculation.
Yeah, I actually feel like I need to correct you on that, because the longer it takes, the more expensive it is.
It's absolutely true. But, all I'm saying is, in the back of my mind, is that I could imagine that there's some kind of phased approach there. I could be totally off, and maybe we build a whole new high school somehow, somewhere. But
I have Jeremy's hand has been up for quite some time, so let him ask his question.
Yeah, so again, acknowledging the Ways and Means recommendation is that the debt exclusions are desirable, but don't make the project contingent on them. If we're going to pursue them anyway, why are we not just front loading it and taking care of it? I don't understand, I guess, the delay, or, why we're putting it off for almost a year if we're going to pursue them anyway. I guess it's just what I'm struggling to rectify in my mind.
So the, so I think one important question is basically when you want to do debt exclusion relative to the town meeting vote. I think the general thinking was it makes sense to have the town meeting vote first, so that we can give, so basically, so town meeting can give guidance to what they feel should be done to the town, which is their job. It's their job to be the most informed people in town and to provide essentially recommendations of here, we want to do this project, it makes sense. And so therefore, you town voter, may want to think about, doing a debt exclusion that makes sense in that context. Realistically, there's no need to quote rush to having the debt exclusion vote. The actual significant expenses associated with the project will not be hitting before the April election anyway. So it's not an issue as far as that goes. And again, I think the sense was this is clearly a very important town issue. And it seemed like a very natural fit to do that in the town election. So that is the thought process. So the goal wasn't to delay it. The goal was to just pick an election that made a lot of sense, and that happens to be in April.
Thank you.
I think there's some nuance that might be lost. I guess it's all the more reason to spend some good time thinking about this before that debt exclusion vote. I heard some consternation that we're recommending to go ahead, and then we're recommending there might be problems if we don't do a debt exclusion. I think these are two different decisions. The need to build a police station and the need to get going building schools is very well established. We've been talking about this for decades. And
Ed, can you pull the mic up a little bit? Sorry.
we're well along our way. We've made the decision. These are necessary projects. And I think that the debt exclusion, paradoxically, doesn't bear directly on these projects. It bears on our finances in the future and whether we have the same freedom to make good decisions and good investments in the future. So I'll just say that this is not to make the high school less possible, it's to make the high school more possible in order to make good rational decisions down the line. And in terms of the pessimism, I heard that that we are saying that we can't afford it. That's not at all the case. What we have to realize is that we were purposely modeling a worst case scenario to make sure that we could head off a worst case scenario. So the assumptions about our spending growth are rather liberal. The assumptions in the model about revenues and growth and tax base have many layers of pessimism. So the idea here is to be very prudent and to head off potential problems.
My concern here is that I think the school committee, school department would agree that we need more than just one new school. We need 3, 4, 5. I'd love to build, 7 new schools or additions, et cetera. So I would vote for all of them, but we're limited by what the town is willing to vote for and what the people are willing to pay for. And if we're not asking the people what they're willing to pay for, I'm worried that at some point we're going to run up against, like, you guys, that's enough. We're done. We're not funding all of these projects. And so we have no true idea of what the priorities in the town really are. And this one is first, and that's fine. They're all necessary. But doing this one in this manner, does that feel like we lose the trust of the town by us saying we're definitely moving forward with this, whether you like it or not, and then you can vote for it later? We're still doing it even if you have no. we're just gonna hurt our operating budget. Do we risk losing the trust of the voters in that case? And does that jeopardize the high school and a new Pineland, and our operating budget?
So it's a legitimate question. Again, I would say that, the town has done many capital projects. For instance, we just did 2 DPW buildings for $32 million. That was not put in front of the town. That was put in front of town meeting, which is exactly how all of our other building projects have been done. It's a perfectly reasonable thing that the representative people are deciding what is reasonable to do. I think the important thing to realize, and I know that you folks realize it, but I think an important thing that we need to get across to town is that the debt exclusion vote is not a referendum on whether we should do the projects or not. That's specifically what we want to decouple. The debt exclusion vote is a vote for fiscal responsibility and to provide flexibility in terms of where levy might go in the future in terms of providing the services the town wants. It happens to be attached to the debt that's associated with these projects because that's a requirement of the Prop 2.5 process. But the debt exclusion is, we specifically want to make clear, is not a referendum on whether to do these projects or not. What I would encourage, and I think a lot of people have given the building committee input on this, is that if you have a strong opinion on what the town should be doing in terms of building for things like the police station or other schools, the high school, just like the population got involved very heavily with, I think you guys got a fair amount of feedback on the Fox Hill project as to what people wanted to see and didn't want to see. At least in the meetings I was at, I didn't hear a lot of people with pitchforks saying we don't want to build a school at all, although I'm sure there are some that have that opinion. But, if that's how folks feel, they should get involved by either coming to these meetings and saying, no, I don't want a new high school, and I don't care what conditions it's in, it's great. Or I don't think we need to build that police station. They should get involved with that by either coming to the meetings, or they should, everyone's got a town meeting rep. They should absolutely contact them and tell them how they feel, positive or negative, give that feedback. That's how the process works. The wrong way to get feedback is to have a debt exclusion vote that isn't really tied to the project and see what people think about that. I would have to argue that's probably the worst way to get feedback as to what the town's thinking. It's a way to do it, but not a good way, I don't think.
I also asked you to clarify with the MSBA if that was allowed for us to do a debt exclusion after the fact and not within that 120-day window. I did not find that response very helpful.
No, the response was, it didn't say this directly, but the town's matters of approving the project are the town's matters to seek legal counsel and bond counsel in the case of a debt exclusion and outbound project. So I was hoping for a more direct answer, but what I gleaned from that was that it's the town's decision on how to approve the project and separately pay for it. But as long as that goes through the necessary and proper channels, and as long as you can sign project scope and budget agreement that you have the funding in place or have a means to put it in place, that's all they really care about.
Yeah, just to clarify a little bit there, I agree completely. If the funding isn't contingent on a debt exclusion, then the debt exclusion really has nothing to do with the funding agreement for MSBA. And in fact, within Prop 2.5, not that I'm suggesting we do this, we could wait 3 years and do a debt exclusion, and that would be a perfectly legitimate thing from a Prop 2.5 point of view. We could do it after the school is totally built. As long as there's still debt service, we can do a debt exclusion. So as soon as you say that the funding is not contingent on debt exclusion really has nothing to do with MSBA anymore. Obviously we should get a lawyer to say that, but it seems pretty clear cut.
I guess I was gonna say what John said, which is that we have to secure the funding. The funding isn't contingent on the debt exclusion, so we don't have to do the debt exclusion to satisfy MSBA by my reading. But I'll add just one more thing, which is there's a lot of doom and gloom because we're trying to look at worst case scenarios, but the very happy result of the projections we did at the, in the first instance is that we can afford these projects. That's what we concluded. And that's why Steve recommended the town meeting go ahead and vote to bond them and go ahead with the project.
Okay, we're not taking a vote, correct? Anymore on this.
No hands.
Okay. Start.
Like,
just next meeting or other topics?
Other topics?
Public in here, anybody on that?
No one online.
Okay, so we had one scheduled, we can retake that 23rd one. Is it community?
Yeah, so we just, we know the calendar gets pretty full, so we're trying to look ahead through the end of August to round out feasibility, thinking we need at least one meeting each of those months. So we'd like to try as best we can to get a placeholder on the calendar if we could. So I don't know.
The 16th is school vacation. Do we need two in April? Oh, the 23rd would be a community meeting?
Yeah, it's not
okay.
these dates, it's.
Okay, then maybe we'll try to do something before. It's the 9th is regular school committee, right? Yeah, Jen.
The last meeting, we had 4-8 on the schedule. Is that being revised or is that in lieu of these?
I don't know if it was ever confirmed. So if that's an appropriate date, we confirm that up, great. If we need to look beyond that because there's other conflicts, we just wanted to have a discussion about it.
I just know it's a Monday and I had some scheduling conflicts at home that I was gonna have to find childcare for, so I have the paperwork. So I just wanted to make sure beforehand things.
Yeah, we were told that there were scheduling conflicts on that date, so we decided to pick all Tuesdays. And I went through your town calendar and pulled all available Tuesdays that there wasn't a school committee or a select board meeting. So that's what you see up there. Okay, the 16th is just school vacation. So I'll pick that up. Yeah, I could just, but we're gonna need one before the 23rd if that's gonna be the committee.
So
do you want to go back to the 8th or no? Yeah.
Pretty full.
Okay.
I was gonna say, do we have anything big that we need to discuss in April, or is it just reviewing it where we could do like a quick?
Well, we need to plan a community meeting.
Well, I didn't know, I think one time we did it as remote. And
We can do it remote. I don't care. I want to do the 8th remote. I'm happy to do remote.
That's gonna allow us some time to.
Yeah, we just need a presentation to review, right? For the community meeting. Is that enough time for Janisco? Okay. I mean, I'm not going away on April vacation. We could do remote on the 16th.
If anything, we did put on the list as a
School vacation's tough.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, that's fine.
It's a quick turnaround, waiting until the next meeting.
Oh, okay. No, I just asked if we officially canceled the 8th, just because I don't have that in my calendar as canceled yet, but we're deciding right now, yeah. Okay.
Keep it in 8th, and we can make it remote if people want. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I think for the community meeting, that makes sense.
Catherine.
Yeah, I just through the chair, July 2nd, that week also, a lot of people go away.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even scroll that far down. Yeah.
Birthday. July 2nd, great day.
Yeah, let's just, yeah, we can tighten. I assume we'll need more or less as we go into August, but, we could also do some of the joint, like the half hour before school committee meetings if we need approval.
So if we take off the week of April vacation, take off the week of around July 4th, the other ones are somewhat in play. There's no other major scheduling conflicts that we should know about. Because sometimes 2 weeks is too long, sometimes waiting a full month, especially as we get close to a submittal, tends to drag out, especially if there's some sort of decision or feedback that's really helpful to have. So,
and we should probably get a June date with the high school committee on there as well.
So I think what we'll do is we can take a look at the design schedule, submission schedule, strike those couple of weeks that are off the table and make a proposal.
Sure.
For folks, but for now, we'll hold the 8th and then come back with a proposal. Try to schedule.
Okay. That sounded, yes, like a yes from everyone. All right, we have a motion. To adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Yes. Yes.
Motion, meeting
Aye.
adjourned. Thank you.
And